Many of the cases of Sherlock Holmes were private affairs that made no stir outside the family circles involved. But the disappearance of Silver Blaze was a matter which set the whole country by the ears. For not merely had this horse, the favorite of the Wessex Cup, vanished for a week before the great race, but his trainer had also been tragically murdered. John Straker, the trainer, lived in a small villa about 200 yards from the stables.
Oh, I see you have some newspapers there, Watson. Let's see what they have to say about the matter.
Oh, well, here's the Morning Post, and it says... The horses had been exercised and watered as usual, and the stables locked up at 9 o'clock. 2 of the lads walked up to the trainer's house, where they had supper in the kitchen, whilst the third, Ned Hunter, remained on guard. A few minutes after 9, the maid, Edith Baxter, carried his supper, a dish of curried mutton, down to the stables. As the path ran over the open moor, she carried a lantern with her. About 30 yards away from the stables, a man appeared out of the darkness and called to her to stop.
The girl was frightened by his manner, and she ran past him to the stable window hatch, through which she always used to hand the boy his meals. The hatch was already open. The boy was waiting inside. She'd just begun to tell him what had happened when the stranger came up again.
Let's see here. The boy ran to unleash the dog, and the maid hurried towards the house, but looking back, she saw the stranger leaning in through the stable window. A minute later, when Hunter rushed out with the dog, the stranger was gone. Yes, that's as far as we can get with the Morning Post, I'm afraid. Miss Hudson very stupidly used the other half of the paper to light this morning's fire. I'm sorry.
Well, no matter, my dear fellow. The Telegraph has also covered this occurrence very fully, and I have that right over here. Hunter, on the return of his fellow grooms, sent a message up to that very trainer. According to this, he told him what had happened, and Straker seems to have been vaguely uneasy about the whole matter, for although he'd been to bed, he got up again at 1 o'clock in the morning, telling his wife that he was going down to the stable to see if all was well. He then put on his coat, a mackintosh, for it was raining heavily, and he left the house. Quite a wealth of detail, my dear Watson. And there, upon your table, I have also left the notes of Mrs. Straker's statement.
You're so organized today, Sherlock.
Does that mystify you, Watson? Am I disorganized in your purview? You insult within your compliments with the precision of a surgeon.
Maybe that's because I am a surgeon, Holmes. Let's see here. Maybe we have... Here. After her husband had gone out, she went back to sleep again and didn't wake until 7 o'clock in the morning. Finding him still absent, she called the maid, and they set off together for the stables. They found the door wide open. Inside, huddled on a chair, was Hunter in a state of complete stupor. The lads in the loft overheard, had heard nothing all night, but the favorite's stall was empty and there was no sign of the trainer. Hunter had obviously been drugged.
Well, undoubtedly, Watson. Let me see that. Mrs. Straker and the maid had left him and ran to the moor to see whether Straker had merely taken the horse out for exercise, and there the murder was discovered. All right, suppose you read me the rest of Mrs. Straker's statement with your brand of banal and uninspired tonality, Watson.
You wish you had such a rich baritone as mine, Sherlock. Well, yes, here it is. Some quarter of a mile from the stables, Mrs. Straker and the maid found Straker's coat flapping from a furze bush. Immediately beyond, there was a bowl-shaped depression on the moor, and the bottom of this John Straker's body was found. His head shattered by a savage blow from some heavy weapon. Wounded in the thigh, a long, clean cut, evidently inflicted by a sharp instrument. Straker had obviously tried to defend himself, for in his left hand he grasped a red and black silk cravat, which was recognized by the maid as having been worn by the stranger who'd spoken to her outside the stables. Hunter, the stable boy, also identified it when he recovered from the effects of the drug. This was apparently powdered opium which had been put into his curried mutton. Now that explains what the stranger was doing as he leant through the stable window, remember?
For the lads who ate the same meal at the trainer's house were quite all right, so only one plate has been drugged, Watson. It goes on to say that there were then abundant proofs in the mud, which lay at the bottom of the fatal hollow, that the missing horse, Silver Blaze, had been there at the time of the struggle. Well, Watson, that has passed our little journey quite agreeably, for now we can discuss what occurred at Tavistock.
Yes. Tavistock. Tavistock lies like the boss of a shield in the middle of the huge circle of Dartmoor. Two gentlemen were waiting for us at the station. Silver Blaze's owner, the well-known sportsman, Colonel Ross, and Inspector Gregory of the Scotland Yard.
The colonel said he was delighted that we had come down, and then the inspector had done all that he could possibly be suggested, but I wished to leave no stone unturned in trying to avenge poor Straker and recover their beloved horse.
Inspector made very little progress. As you know, we had no difficulty in tracing the stranger. He was well known in the neighborhood. His name is, Fitzroy Simpson, a man who's come down in the world and lives by a little quiet and genteel bookmaking in the London clubs. His books showed he was carrying bets of up to £5,000 against the favourite. When confronted with the cravat, he turned very pale and was utterly unable to account for his presence in the hand of the murdered man.
Of course, Straker himself was wounded, wasn't he? In the thigh, you said? He may have wounded himself in the convulsive struggles which could follow any brain injury, eh, Watson?
Possibly. Yes.
Excellent, my dear Watson, but it's more than possible. It's probable. In which case, one of the main points in favor of the accused seems to disappear entirely. You know, a clever counsel would tear this case to rags. Why should Simpson take the horse out of the stable? If he wished to injure it, he could do that there. Had a duplicate key to the stable door been found in his possession? And what chemist sold him this powdered opium? Above all, where could he, a stranger to this district, hide a horse? And such a horse as Silver Blaze. Now, tell me, Watson, what was his own explanation as to that note which he wished the maid to give to the stable boy?
He said it was a £10 note, and one was found in his purse. Also, he's not a stranger to the district. He's twice lodged at Tavistock in the summer. The opium he probably brought with him from London. The key, having served its term, will be hurled away. As for the horse, he may well lie at the bottom of one of the pits or old mines upon the moor.
What does he say about that cravat? Remind me.
Holmes, with that memory of yours, I find myself checking my notes a lot more often than I used to. Are you getting old?
Old. And tired of wasting my patience on irrelevant chatter. The cravat, Watson?
Simpson admits that it's his and says that he lost it, but a new element has arrived, has been introduced into the case, which may account for his leading the horse from the stables. We found traces that show that a party of gypsies encamped on Monday night within a mile of the spot where the murder took place. On Tuesday, they were gone. Simpson may well have been leading the horse to them when he was overtaken.
Well, it was certainly a possibility at the time.
Yes, and that's a factor we must certainly not neglect.
As well as the fact as there is a neighboring stable, and Desborough, their horse, was second in the betting. So they had an interest in the disappearance of Silver Blaze. Silas Brown, their trainer, is known to have had large bets upon the event, and he was no friend to poor Straker, no. However, we have examined Watson his stables, and there's nothing to connect him with this affair.
And nothing to connect Fitzroy Simpson with their interests?
Well, nothing at all, but the wisps of suspicion are merely there because he was born with a suspicious face.
When the suspects are dead ends, we find that it serves well to learn about the victim of the crime.
I presume that you made an inventory of what he had in his pockets at the time of his death, Watson.
Yes. Here we are. They are... Let's see, pocket, interior... Yes. Okay. They're here, a box of matches, 2 inches of tallow candle, pencil case, a few papers, and the ivory-handled knife.
Yes, a very singular knife, Watson. Surely a knife in your line.
It's what we call a cataract knife. We use it for surgical purposes, including very delicate operations.
A strange thing for a man to be carrying out on this rough expedition onto the moors. Why, it won't even get shut if he puts it into his pocket, right, Watson?
Well, the trip was guarded by a cork which was found beside his body. His wife tells us that he kept it for some days on the dressing table and picked it up as he left the room. A poor weapon, but perhaps the best he could lay his hands on at the moment?
And the papers, Watson?
Well, which papers?
What do you mean, which papers? Obviously, the dead man's papers, Watson.
Oh, those papers. Oh, yes. Hay dealer's accounts, the letter from Colonel Ross, and this dressmaker's account for £37.15, made out by a Madame Lesieur of Bond Street.
Yes, it was made out to William Derbyshire.
William Derbyshire.
Yes, Watson, I inquired about that while you were busy scribbling in that book of yours. Mrs. Straker tells us that he was a friend of her husband's, that occasionally letters for him arrived there at their home.
Did I hear you asking Mrs. Straker about a garden party in the Plymouth recently? You said she wore a costume of dove-colored silk with ostrich feather trimmings. Holmes, I believe you've got your hand on a clue.
Oh, do you? Well, as a matter of fact, I was just remembering a really excellent curry that we once ate together in Soho, Watson.
Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes next asked to be shown the spot where the murder had been committed. A short walk across the moor brought us to the hollow in which the body had been found. At the brink of it was the fir bush upon which the coat belonging to the murdered man had been hung.
There was no wind the night of his death, I understand.
None. But very heavy rain.
Well, in that case, the coat was not blown against the furze bushes. It must have been placed there purposefully.
Yes, laid across the bush.
That's very interesting.
Additional evidence included the boots which Straker wore, one of Fitzroy Simpson's shoes, and a cast horseshoe of Silver Blaze.
Ah, but what about that spent match, Watson? Did you forget to include the match in your list?
I can't think how I can miss it.
Fret not, Watson. It was invisible. It was buried in the mud. I only found it because I was specifically looking for it.
What? You expected to find it?
Well, I thought it not unlikely. They had also searched the ferns around the rim of the hollow for any more tracks, of course.
Well, I'm afraid there were none.
So I put that horseshoe in my pocket, remember, Watson? Just for, luck.
I suppose you know your own methods best, Holmes, and there was much discussion over whether it was owed to the public to scratch Silver Blaze from the Wessex Cup.
And I said, no, let the name stand.
Yes, I remember.
All right, at this point we may leave the question of who killed John Straker for the moment and confine ourselves to finding out what has become of that horse, Watson. Now, supposing he broke away during or after the tragic death of John Straker, where could that horse have gotten to?
Well, anywhere on Dartmoor, I should imagine.
Oh, no, dear no. The horse is a gregarious animal. If left to himself, his instincts would have been either to return to King's Pyland or to go on to Capelton, yonder. Why should he run wild out into the moors? No, he's not at King's Pyland, so he must be at Capelton.
We'd not far to go. And as we approached the gates of Capelton, we met a groom coming out of them.
He thought we were loitering. Imagine that, Sherlock Holmes, a loiterer. What would Mycroft say if this little tidbit got back to him?
I must say.
I only wanted to speak to the stable groom for a few moments. I wanted 10 minutes alone with Mr. Silas Brown.
Well, I must say, Holmes, I was thrown off by your exchange with Mr. Silas Brown. As soon as he set eyes on us, he shouted, I have no time to talk to every gadabout, and we don't want strangers here. Be off, or you may find a dog at your heels. Good grief, I was shocked by his lack of hospitality.
You'll request the moment between Mr. Brown and myself, and recall that I whispered a few words to him next, and his attitude changed pretty smartish, Watson.
Yes, he was singing a different tune when he headed into the stables, Holmes. It was 20 minutes before he returned.
I told him that there must be no mistake, and that he would hear from me the next day. We bid a good day to Mr. Silas Brown. Don't you see, Watson? A more perfect compound of the bully, coward, and sneak than Master Brown I have seldom met with. Do you understand, Watson? Do you see?
Oh my, he had the horse then in his stables.
He tried to bluster it out, but I told him so exactly what his actions had been that morning that he was convinced I had actually been watching him. He was first down as usual and seeing a strange horse wandering alone on the moor. He went out to find it, when he recognized it as Silver Blaze, from the white splash on its forehead.
Yes.
His first instinct was to return it to the King's Pyland stable, which he did set out to do, Watson, but he then realized the horse should be hidden until after the Wessex Cup. Then his own horse, Desborough, would almost certainly win. So he changed his mind, turned back halfway, and brought Silver Blaze back to his own stables.
No, but I thought his stables had been thoroughly searched.
Oh, an old horse faker like him. He's got many a dodge, Watson.
But weren't you afraid to leave the horse in his power? I mean, since he had every interest in injuring it.
Do you think I would leave a majestic horse in danger, Doctor?
Well,
my dear fellow, Brown will guard it like the apple of his eye. He knows that his only hope of mercy is to produce it safely at the racetrack after the Wessex Cup, when his own horse had won. I made that perfectly clear to him when I whispered. But I did have a little trick to play on a certain Colonel Ross. You may have noticed that his manner to me was just a trifle cavalier when we met. So that's why I didn't want him to know that we had found the horse.
well, I was awfully curious about that, Sherlock. Do you think the Colonel resents your getting yourself involved in the case?
The better question is, do you think the Colonel resents me?
He might.
Yes, he might.
You get that a lot, Holmes.
What, resentment? I'm used to it. And of course, this is all quite a minor matter compared with the question of who actually killed John Straker.
And so you devoted yourself to that in the meantime.
Indeed, Johnny. That's why I surprised everyone by quitting.
I was thunderstruck by my friend's work. We'd only been a few hours in Devonshire. That he should give up an investigation which he had begun so brilliantly was, quite incomprehensible to me. Not one word more could I draw from him. He can go silent as death when it pleases him. That's old Sherlock for you. You would do me a great favor still if you could lay your hands on the murderer of John Straker.
I have done so.
You've done so. You've got him, but where is he then?
Safely in the stables of Mr. Silas Brown. The murderer of
What?
John Straker, Watson, was the horse.
The horse!
Yes, the horse, of course, the horse. Silver Blaze himself. It may lessen the guilt somewhat if I say that the killing was done entirely in self-defense, and that John Straker was a man who was quite unworthy of anyone's confidence.
Well, tell me, Sherlock, how was it done?
I must confess that even I suspected Fitzroy Simpson myself for a time. It was only when I reached the trainer's house that the immense significance of the curried mutton occurred to me, Watson.
The curried mutton? You mean when you mentioned our Soho meal?
Exactly. Powdered opium has a disagreeable and perceptible flavor. Only something more strongly flavored like a curry could have disguised the taste of opium. Now, Fitzroy Simpson could never have known that the maid would be serving the stable lad with a curry that night. The only people who could have possibly known that were the people in the house at the time. So, who could have taken advantage of this fact? And then there was the silence of the dog you mentioned. When the horse was taken from the stables, it failed to bark because it knew who the intruder was. I was already quite convinced that the intruder must have been John, John, Straker himself.
Straker, but why did he wish to take Silver Blaze out onto the moor in the dead of night, and secretly?
The answer to that was already said. It was in John Straker's pocket, Watson.
The dressmaker's bill?
Precisely. Addressed to William Derbyshire. That set me thinking. Perhaps John Straker was leading a double life. After all, a wife confirmed that expensive costume I mentioned was not for her. And I had recognized a photo with him and Madame Lessuyer, the dressmaker, later confirmed that John Straker had indeed bought it there from her to be given to someone with more expensive tastes than his own wife, clearly.
In fact, John Straker was leading a double life and was in a bad financial strait.
And the knife gave me the final clue. You admitted it was a surgical knife, such as could be used to lame a horse without leaving any visible evidence of foul play. By laming Silver Blaze and betting on Desborough, John Straker could have been able to retrieve a fortune.
Oh, the scoundrel!
Here's what happened. Straker led the horse out onto the moor so that when he cut its tendon, its plunging wouldn't waken the grooms overhead. In order that he could see what he was going to do, he would need a candle. So, the candle's not going to be seen, he had to lead the horse out to the hollow. By lighting that candle, he dropped that spent match into the mud. Unfortunately for him, the light must have scared the horse, unless the great beast was merely following its keen instincts. Whichever it was, the horse lashed out. Its steel shoe caught Straker full in the forehead. He'd been taken off his coat before, and he was free, so finally he gashed himself on the thigh with his own knife. And there you have it.
Brilliant, Holmes. And the cravat, Fitzroy Simpson's, which was in the dead man's hand?
Simpson said he lost it. No doubt he did. Straker found it, picked it up, perhaps with the idea of using it to secure the horse's leg, perhaps. Well, that disposes of every piece of evidence, quite simply, Watson. Perhaps we could while away the rest of this afternoon with a simple game of chess.
Once I'm through with my writing, Sherlock, set up the board.
Watson, the loser from the last game sets up the board. Hurry up with your scribblings, John.